Has this ever happened to you? Where you are making a game and suddenly you thought that water would make your game look a lot more beautiful. Or you're making a tropical game and you have a beach in your game, so water is a must. You go to the asset store and search for water and you find a lot of assets, but if you're a student like me who has zero budget for their game, you simply can't afford it. Or you want to learn how to create water in Unity, then you have come to the right place, because in today's video we're gonna learn how to create water shader in Unity. So let's start. Hey guys, it's Apurva. Welcome back to another video. Let's clear out one thing here. This video is a remake of Unity's official tutorial on water shader, because that video is kind of outdated since Unity updated a lot of things including shader graph. So some things are renamed. If you enjoy game development related content, consider subscribe. As you can see here, I have already a Unity scene open here. I'm currently using Unity's universal render pipeline and my Unity version is Unity 2020.3.15 F2. So if you wanna use exact version like me, there we go. Now I'm gonna talk about some things that I've included in this project. First of all, I have a simple terrain here with a sand texture on it to show my water shader working, so you don't have to do this. And I have two things in my projects folder. Ignore all the things and focus on the meshes folder and textures folder. Both of these will be linked down below so that you can download them. You will see in a second why I have a water mesh and two textures included. Both of the textures are normal maps, so make sure you check that both of them are set as normal map. When you import a texture in Unity, it will be set to default, so make sure you change that to normal map, otherwise it's gonna mess things up. Since I have explained how my project is set up, let's focus on creating the water shader now. What I'm going to do is create a plane. This is just Unity's default plane, and if I go to wireframe mode, you can see that this plane has a lot less vertices. Later in this video we're gonna add waves to our water to make it look more realistic. So we need a plane that has a lot more vertices so that we can use vertex displacement to show the waves. So what I'm going to do is select the water and first of all remove the mesh collider, because we don't any colliders with our water. And under the mesh filter, what I'm going to do is create this, click on this cock type thing, and what I'm going to do here is select the water block 50M LOD0. That's why I have a water mesh included in my project, because I need a plane that has a lot more vertices than the default plane. As you can see, as soon as I select it, the plane becomes bigger, and if I go to wireframe mode, you can see that this plane now has a lot more vertices to work with. So I'm just going to quickly scale my plane to fit half of my terrain nicely so that it looks nice. Now let's go to the fun part, creating the shader. So in my project folder, I'm going to right click and under shader, as you can see, previously we used to select PBR graph, but as I told in the beginning of the video, shader graph has upgraded and renamed a lot of things. That's why PBR graph is no longer available. But if we go under the universal render pipeline, you will see that it's there is a shader called lit shader graph. So this is basically our PBR graph now. So I'm going to select it and name the shader water shader, and while the shader is selected, what I'm going to do is right click and create a material from it. So what I'm going to do is rename the material to water, and I'm going to apply it to our plane. As you can see, the water material is applied to our plane. Now let's make the water look like water. The color and transparency of our water will change relative to the light passing through it. To simulate this in our water shader, we are going to use data from our camera and screen to calculate the depth of the scene. Water closer to the surface will be more transparent and brighter, whereas water farther from the shoreline will be more opaque and dark. Now keep in mind that you may need to enable this feature and will have to enable these features in your render pipeline. Now if I expand the settings folder, you can see that there is 3 universal render pipeline settings, you can say, already configured for us. So the first one is high quality, low quality and medium quality. if I go to edit, project settings, and under graphics, I can see that my scriptable render pipeline settings is using the high quality preset. So what I'm going to do is, back in my projects, I'm going to select the high quality preset, and under there you can see that there is a depth texture and opaque texture, and I'm going to enable both of these so that we can use them in our scene. Now let's open our water shader, and as soon as you open the water shader, the shade looks a little bit different, but at the same time it's the PBR graph. You can see on the left side we have the properties to create custom properties for our shader, and the vertex and fragment is the main or master node, and we have a main preview the right side, and also on the right side we have a graph inspector. Previously what we needed to do is change the graph settings from the master node, and previously on the properties we would create a property and change its settings from there, but in the new version of shader graph both of these are moved to the right side, so it's a good thing, you can say. Now first things first, what I'm going to do is, under my graph settings, I'm going to change the surface type from opaque to transparent, because water should be transparent. We're going to create a gradient that fades based on its depth from the water surface. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, press space. This will bring the search bar and search camera. Now remember this workflow, because every time I create a node, what I'm going to do is press space and search the name of the node. So keep in mind this shortcut. I'm also going to create a scene depth node. Now what I'm going to do is multiply the scene depth with the depth buffer on the camera. So the depth buffer is the far plane of our camera node. Now we need to localize this in the screen space of the mesh. So what I'm going to do is create a screen position node and set the mode to raw, and I'm also going to split the screen position node. Now let's get the clip space position, which is the A channel here, and send it to an add node, and I'm also going to create a new float property called depth. If you have seen the Unity's official tutorial, this used to be vector1, but now they have changed its name from vector1 to float. So I'm going to create a float named depth, and you will see me do this for every custom properties that I create. Is under the reference, I'm going to just copy paste the name with a dash. I think it's called a dash in front of it, so make sure you do that every time you create a custom property. It's a good practice to do this. And I'm also going to take the depth float and connect it to our add node. Finally, let's subtract screen space value from the multiplied value of our depth buffer, and let's connect it to our base color. Previously this used to be albedo. Now if we save the shader and take a look at our water, we now have a gradient on our water, and we can use the depth value and adjust the white and black parts of our gradient. We really want to adjust the strength of this gradient and have some control over the edge so that it blends well. So now let's do that. Back in shader graph, I'm going to delete this connection and create a multiplied node here, and I'm also going to create a float called strength and set this to a slider this time, and the max value is going to be 2. Now I'm going to multiply the subtract value and the strength value together, and I'm going to take the multiplied value and hook it up to a clamp node so that black and white never exceed 0 or 1. In a shader, black is typically represented by the float value 0 and white by 1. So we want to make sure that we clamp our values within that range to make sure that nothing unexpected happens. We now have a strength slider in our water that we can use to easily blend between black and white part of our water. Now let's make our water look like water. So we're going to add colors to our water right now. So let's again open the shader graph and let's create two color properties called deep water color and shallow water color. And I'm going to set the color for deep water to a dark blue. But as you can see that I have selected the color, but as soon as I close the window, it goes back to black because I need to select the color and make sure the alpha value is up, because by default the alpha value is at 0, which basically means there is no alpha. So you need to make sure that you to change the alpha value, and don't give it a 250 value, that's the max alpha value, because we want our water to be transparent at all times. The transparency of the water will depend on how far the water is from the shoreline, but at all times the water will be transparent. So I'm going to also select the shallow water color to a light blue. Now I'm going to delete the connection between the base color and the clamp node and create a LURP node here, and take both of our color nodes and add them to the LURP node. Make sure the shallow water color is on the A channel and deep water color is on the B channel. And now let's take this value and hook it up to our base color. Let's use the gradient we created as the mask for our LURP node. The result will be blend between two colors based on the gradient we created. We also need to make sure that the alpha values between the two colors will also blend. So let's create a split node, and from the split node let's take the alpha value which is the A channel and hook it up to the alpha value of our master node or our fragment node. Now if we save the shader graph and go back to Unity, you can see that we have color on our water, but it looks kind of not okay because we have shadows enabled in our mesh and we don't want our water to cast shadows. So what I'm going to do is select the water, and under the mesh renderer lighting I'm going to turn off the cast shadows, and for some reason my shallow water color didn't select, so I'm going to select the color again, and now we have a nice blend between the two colors using the gradient that we created. Now the watercolor might look a bit dull to you because our scene doesn't have a lighting set yet. I mean, it has lighting, as you can see on the hierarchy, it has directional light, but I have turned auto generate lighting off and the lighting is not generated and the settings haven't set yet, so it looks a bit weird. But later in this tutorial I'm going to fix the lighting and the water will look exactly like water should. Now this is a pretty good start, but what we could do with some details on the surface, because if you take a look at water in real life, the water is not plain like we have here. Water in real life has some textures or little waves over it. One way to simulate the look of waves on water is to use two normal maps moving in different directions. So let's open our shader graph again, and now let's create two texture 2D properties called main normal and second normal, and make sure you set the mode of both of these to bump because these are normal maps. And now connect both of these to their own sample texture 2D node. Now let's offset both of these textures. So from the UV channel of the sample texture 2D node, I'm going to create a tiling and offset node for both of these, and for now I'm going to set the tiling to 100 so that the texture nicely fits on our water surface. I'm also going to create a time node and hook the time to two divide nodes, and I'm going to set we want our textures to move in different directions. So for one divide node I'm going to set the X value to 50 and the second to -25 so that both of these moves in different directions, and I'm going to hook the divide node to our offset channel in our tiling and offset node. Now let's take the RGBA from our sample texture 2D and add both of these sample texture 2D nodes. Now let's take the output of our add node to the normal channel and connect it. Now if we save our shader graph and go back to Unity and provide both of the texture, it really doesn't matter where you put which texture you put first. Just put one and then select another because they are going to move in different directions, so this really doesn't matter. Just put them, and as you can see you have a nice texture on your plane, but I think it's a little low for my choice. Again, this is going to depend on the game you are making or on the scale of your water, but I'm going to set my tiling and offset to 20 for both of these so that I can visually see the textures. Again, in game this you need to adjust this according to your game, so make sure you adjust both of these according to your game. Our scene has now texture, but it's a bit aggressive and it could do with a little bit of fading off as we reach the shoreline. Let's add control for our normal strength. So let's open the shader graph again and delete the connection between the add and the normal node and add a normal strength node here. And I'm also going to create a custom property here called normal strength, and it's going to be the type of float, and I'm going to make it a slider from 0 to 1, and I'm going to hook that up to the normal strength channel of our normal strength node. We also want to make sure that the texture fades off as it reaches the shoreline. So what I'm going to do is create a LURP node and use the depth gradient that we created earlier to make sure that the textures fade off as we reach the shoreline. So I'm going to take the clamp output of our depth gradient and hook it up to the T channel of our LURP node, and I'm going to delete the normal strength connection and hook it up to the A channel of our LURP node, and I'm going to take the output of a LURP node and hook it up to the strength channel of our normal strength. Now our texture should nicely fade away as it reaches the shoreline. Now if you take a look at water, the water also reflects light, so we need to make sure that we can control that. So in my custom properties channel, I'm going to create a new property called smoothness, and I'm going to make it a slider from 0 to 1. And if you take a look at the master node, you can see that we already have a smoothness and the default value is 0.5. So I'm going to select the default value of our smoothness property to 0.5, and I'm going to save the shader and go back to Unity. As you can see that if I now just increase the normal strength, we can visually see that the strength actually increases, and if we increase the smoothness value of our water, it also reflects more light. But as I've said earlier, the lighting of our scene is not set yet, so the difference isn't that much, but you can see the difference clearly that it changes something. So just play around these sliders and values to get the right amount of texture on your water and right amount of depth on your water. And now what I'm going to do is set the lighting up so that the water looks like water. If you take at the water now, you can see that the water looks a lot more like water. I have a very low end PC, that's why it looks a bit cartoonish here. If you choose the colors right and make sure that you play with the settings a little bit, I can guarantee you that the water will look a lot more realistic than it is looking in my screen right now. I already said I have a very low end PC, that's why the water is looking like this. But the final thing that we need to do is add some motion to our water. So we can add some motion to our water by passing noise over the UV of our texture. We can use the brightness value to offset the vertices of our water along the y-axis. So let's open the shader graph. Now let's create a new position node and set the space to object here, and we're going to split this position node. So let's hook it up to a split node. Now we need a displacement value for our waves. So on the properties channel, I'm going to create a displacement and set the default to 0.5, and I'm going to create a gradient noise here and set the value to 20, so it's a bit more larger. And I'm going to take the displacement node and the gradient noise, and I'm going to multiply both of these. This is going to act as the mask for our vertex offset. So we can connect this into the Y property, which is the green channel of a new combine node. And now let's take the R and B channel from the split node and hook it up to the combine node. And from the combined node, we are going to take the RGB3, not RGBA4, the RGB3, and hook it up to the vertex position. And if we take a look at the water and change the displacement value, we can see that we can now control the displacement of our water, and we have got a wave-like pattern on our water. All we need to do right now is add some motion to it, which we have already learned how to do when we were adding motion to our normal maps. So let's again open the water shader, and if you take a look at before, what you need to do is add a tiling and offset node and add a time node to it. So let's do that here right now. So from the gradient noise UV, Similarly, I'm going to create a tiling and offset node, and from the tiling and offset node's offset channel, I'm going to create a divide node, and from the divide node, I'm going to create a time node and set the divide node to 100 so that we have some nice controls over the waves. Now let's save the water shader and go back to Unity, and as you can see now, the water moves over time and it looks like waves on the water. Now right now my Unity is lagging a little bit because I have already told you I have a very low end PC. That's why it's hard for me to render this kind of high vertex objects. If you have a high-end PC or a mid-range PC, this will be fine in your case. This will look more realistic and you have a water shader in your game. So yeah, that's it for this video. This is a very dynamic shader. You can add to this shader and create a water shader that fits your game. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, and yeah, I will see you in the next video.